Greetings, it's your host, Gabe Morales, continuing with our true crime series. Today, I'm going to cover Gary Leon Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, who, like Ted Bundy, was a prolific sex offender and serial killer. And like Ted Bundy, while sex was part of his method of operation, he actually got off more on the power and control he had over his victims, as they struggled with him and pleaded with him to let them live. He killed many young teenage girls and women in Washington state, mostly in the greater Seattle area, during the 1980s and 90s. And I will have a guest on who dealt with Ridgway when he was housed at the King County Jail in Seattle, where I worked for almost 25 years. Ridgway was initially convicted of 48 murders, but as part of his plea bargain, another conviction was added, bringing the total number to 49 victims, which I will discuss in detail, as I knew that 49th victim and her family very well. Most of Ridgway's victims were alleged to be sex workers, as was victim number 49, who was more than just a number. She was a daughter, a sister, and a mother who was loved very much by her family, but at the time felt she had no other choice but to become involved in human trafficking. And unfortunately, like other young women, that choice led to her death. Other victims of Ridgway were runaways, who he tricked to get into his vehicle. Gary Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, and he states his home life was somewhat troubled. Relatives described his mother as being domineering and controlling, and while young, he experienced several violent arguments between his parents. His father, who was a bus driver, would often complain about the presence of sex workers. Evidently, Ridgway had a problem with bedwetting until he was 13 years old, and his mother would wash his genitals after every episode and scold him. He would later tell a psychologist that while growing up, he had conflicting feelings of both anger and sexual attraction towards his mother. He would often watch her through his window while she was sunbathing with barely anything on. So he fantasized about women like her, as well as thought about killing her to shut her up so she would stop berating him. Some experts think this may have led to a later pattern of thinking by Ridgway that led to him being a sexual offender and mass murderer, as he unconsciously dreamed about killing his mother over and over again.
I didn't really think I had an urge to kill her. I just wanted her to stop. And
But what did you want to do to her?
what did I want to do with her? Just to have her stop and
But how would you do it? What did you think in your head about how you would do it? That's what we're trying to get at. When did you first think about treating your mom violently to get what you wanted her to do?
probably in fourth grade.
Okay, there we go. Fourth,
fifth, and sixth was probably about that grade.
and what was in your mind that you wanted to do to get her to treat you a certain way? What did you want to do to your mom here?
I wanted her to stop being angry at me for not knowing how to...
But she wasn't stopping.
No, she wasn't stopping.
Was she?
No.
She kept picking at you, belittling you, embarrassing you. I mean, that was pretty clear from yesterday.
It happened in school, too, so I had...
So what was your way of retaliating against her in your mind? What were you thinking to do to your mom?
I don't know, I was thinking of hurting her. I just wanted her to stop and let me alone. Angry at her for pushing on me to remember, and I just couldn't remember, and I just wanted her to stop.
But she didn't.
She didn't know.
She didn't stop. So somewhere in the fourth or fifth grade, that sense of helplessness that you had not being able to get her to stop would very likely have produced thoughts of taking back some power and control over your mom to get the bitch to shut up. I mean, I'm sorry, but Gary, that's what we hear, and that's what one of the things we're looking to get a better understanding of.
During that thing, I usually took it out on other things instead of hurting her. Living things, killing animals.
Okay.
Killing animals.
Ridgway states that when he was about 16 years old, he stabbed a boy in the ribs when he lured him out to the woods.
I stabbed a kid one time.
Okay.
Stabbed a kid with a knife.
Tell me about that.
Down by Chinook, where I used to go to school. The boy was playing. I stabbed him in the side, and didn't kill him. And I must have been about 6th grade. I think it was 7th grade, and that was at some time I was breaking out windows, throwing rocks at windows at school.
Not interested in that.
But that's what I took my aggression on. I couldn't take it on my mom. I had to take it on my animals and
How many
the
animals?
kids.
You couldn't take your aggressions out on your mom,
No, I couldn't.
but you could think about it.
I could think about it, and
What'd you think?
I thought about hurting her, so she'd shut up and leave me alone, and
How did you think about hurting your mom?
killing her.
And how would you do that?
I thought with my hands, or I didn't have no guns or anything, so I didn't. It had to have been hands, or she was one of us at control, and she was constantly trying to get me to do better in school, and I just couldn't do better. I wanted to have her stop, and the only way was to kill her, to hurt her bad.
Help me understand the knife.
The knives are in the drawer. That would be, I used a knife on that, stabbed that boy, and I used a knife on her if I wanted to. It's a way of killing, and
Okay, so walk me through what you were going to do with the knife in your head to your mother.
cut her throat so she wouldn't stop degrading me and putting me in. I couldn't remember things, and that was the only way I could think of hurting her to get her to stop.
Ridgway graduated from Tyee High School in 1969, which is located not far away from where he picked up many of his victims, and is located about a mile east from the SeaTac Airport and the Strip, which I'll talk about here shortly. When he graduated from Tyee High School in 1969, he married his high school sweetheart, Claudia Craig. He joined the United States Navy and was sent to Vietnam, where he served aboard a supply ship. During his time in the military, Ridgway states that he had frequent intercourse with sex workers overseas and contracted gonorrhea. Although he was angered by this, he continued to have unprotected sex. His marriage to Claudia Craig ended within a year. Later on, once Ridgway was arrested, many friends and family described him as being friendly but strange. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, claimed that Ridgway once placed her in a chokehold. He had become religious during his second marriage and read the Bible at home and at work, frequently insisting to his wife that she follow the strict teachings of the Bible and of their pastor. Ridgway would also frequently cry after hearing sermons or after reading the Bible. But despite his religious indoctrination, Ridgway states he continued to solicit sex workers and frequently asked his wife to participate in sex in public places, sometimes even close to areas where his victims were later assaulted and killed. According to the women in his life, Ridgway had a strong sex drive. His 3 ex-wives and former girlfriends reported that he often demanded sex from them. But this sex was evidently not enough for Ridgway, as on some of those same days, he still engaged in sex with prostitutes. Like his father, he often complained about sex workers, but also took advantage of their services regularly. So it appears he had a love-hate relationship with them. Some have speculated that Ridgway was torn inside between his lust for women and his staunch religious beliefs. The press gave him the nickname the Green River Killer after his first 5 victims were found near the Green River that flows through South King County. This name was given before his true identity was known. It was found that he always strangled his victims, usually by hand, but sometimes using a garrote. After strangling them, he would dump them in forested areas along the river, and like Ted Bundy, sometimes returned to have sexual intercourse with the dead bodies. It is said that Ridgway first became a suspect around 1982 when he was arrested for soliciting prostitution. However, investigators were unable to link him at the time. Later advances in DNA proved that Ridgway was the perpetrator of many crimes. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Ridgway is believed to have murdered up to 71 women in the greater Seattle-Tacoma area. In his interviews and in court statements, Ridgway stated he killed so many women that he lost count. A majority of the murders occurred between 1982 and 1984, and many of them he picked up along Pacific Highway South, also known as Pack Highway, and Highway 99, as well as International Boulevard, which is a well-known sex trafficking area, as is Highway 99 North, also known as Aurora Avenue in Seattle. His victims, like many other girls today, were forced into prostitution and were taking a chance every time they got inside of a stranger's vehicle, any of whom could be the next Gary Ridgway. Ridgway sometimes showed them pictures of his son to gain sympathy, so they're more likely to trust him and feel sorry for him. He killed many of his victims in his home, but sometimes in his truck or after he took them to secluded areas to have sex. And he often used the same locations that he used as body dump sites within South King County. These bodies that were left in clusters were often posed, usually completely nude. And like I stated, he then would sometimes return to have sexual intercourse with them, which is called necrophilia. Ridgway states that he did not find this to be more sexually satisfying, but that having sex with the deceased reduced his chances of being caught during rape. He states that he even transferred a few of the bodies across state lines to Oregon to try to confuse investigators. By the early 1980s, the King County Sheriff's Office had formed the Green River Task Force to investigate suspicious murders. A couple of the task force members included Detective Robert Keppel, who investigated some of Ted Bundy's murders, as well as Dave Reichert, who also interviewed the by then incarcerated Ted Bundy. Bundy offered the detectives some insight into the psychology, motivations, and behavior of the possible killer. Also contributing to the investigation was FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas, who helped develop a profile on the suspect. In 2004, Reichert published his autobiography, Chasing the Devil, My 20-Year Quest to Capture the Green River Killer. As I stated earlier, Ridgway was arrested in 1982, and his mugshots were taken, as seen here. On April 7, 1987, police took hair and saliva samples from Ridgway. Back then, DNA evidence in criminal cases was relatively new. Around 1985, Ridgway began dating Judith Mawson, who became his third wife in 1988. But she claims she did not suspect Ridgway to be a suspect in the Green River killings until 1987, as she did not even watch or read the news. And it is believed that only 3 of his victims were killed after he was married to Mawson. As I stated, DNA samples were taken of Ridgway in 1987, and by late 2001, authorities believed they had enough evidence to charge him with at least 4 homicides that he committed nearly 20 years earlier. He was finally arrested on November 30th, 2001, as he was leaving the Kenworth truck factory where he worked in Renton, Washington. And 3 more victims were soon added to that indictment. We have a special guest who is also a very good friend of mine. We've known each other for about 20 years now and still have remained friends, even though we're both retired. Vergero Bautista, I was asked you there on the 11th floor, you had an inmate named Gary Ridgway. Can you tell us a little bit about That individual, who was known as the Green River Killer and was a serial killer of many young women in King County, he was eventually caught, arrested, and tried after they tried to get this guy, I know, in the early 80s, but were not able to do it for many years. I believe DNA helped solve or pinpoint him in a lot of those cases. Can you tell us a little bit about, because I know you escorted him personally, as seen here in this picture, into King County Court on a regular basis. Can you tell us a little bit about your interactions with him and his demeanor?
Yes, Ridgway is pretty much a quiet inmate. He kept himself. When he first got to the jail, he was, of course, he was on the 7th floor on suicide watch. And then once he was stabilized, or they feared that he wasn't a suicide risk, they brought him up to the 11th floor where I worked as an activities, and they were escorting him to his cell. And so I followed the entourage into his cell. And I still remember it, North Lower B1. That's where he stayed. And as they were removing the cuffs, I do what I normally do instinctively. I grabbed 3 of his fingers while he was kneeling on top of his bed. And so my partner can uncuff him. This was before we had pass-throughs, of course. We used to uncuff him inside the cell with escorts. So I'm grabbing 3 of his fingers while my partner was trying to remove cuffs. And turned around and looked at me. And he said, "We hardly know each other." And I said, "You'll get to know me real well, Mr. Ridgway. I'm here 7 days a week." Of course, feeding him and stuff like that and escorting him. He pretty much kept to himself. He didn't make any problems to speak of. He didn't harass other people while he was on his hour out. He just basically kept to himself.
Was that a protective custody tank?
Yes, 23 in, 1 hour out, of course. But yeah, anywhere where he was moved to, he was with a sergeant and 2 escort, at least.
Ultra security, that was mandatory.
Gotcha. Right, and then I would escort him to courtrooms when I would work court detail. And yeah, he was pretty much quiet, especially when he was being arraigned the first time, where, they were seeking the death penalty and things like that. Very stoic. I don't know if he was just trying to process it in and things like that. Very stoic. And then when we went to the victim impact statements, he actually, of course, broke down and cried when one of the victim's father forgave him. One of the few that forgave him. Other times we were on alert because people wanted to kill him.
Yes. I personally know some families who do not forgive him.
Right.
November 5th, 2003, Ridgway entered a guilty plea on 48 counts of aggravated murder. That would spare him the death penalty in exchange for cooperation in helping law enforcement locate the bodies of his victims. Deputy Prosecutor Jeff Baird, who I occasionally met with regarding gang-involved cases, noted in court that the deal included the names of 41 victims who would not be the subject of the state versus Ridgway if it were not for the plea agreement. On December 18, 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones sentenced Ridgway to 48 life sentences to be served consecutively without the possibility of parole. After his conviction on the 48 murders, Ridgway was placed at the Washington State Penitentiary, located in Walla Walla, Washington, in January 2004. Ridgway was given another life sentence for his 49th documented victim, Rebecca "Becky" Marrero. In February 2011, he was brought back to King County for that case after her body was found on December 21st, 2010. But she had been killed almost 18 years earlier, on December 3rd, 1982, when she was only 20 years old. I knew Becky back in the mid-1970s, soon after her family moved into the old Roxbury Projects, located in southwest Seattle, near White Center, and I visited their apartment often. Becky was the oldest girl. I recall her being beautiful, but very sassy, and she loved her brothers and sisters and family.
I hate your guts, Gary Ridgway, and your day is coming soon.
Years after his murderous spree came to an end, the Green River Killer once again faces justice. As time takes its toll on Gary Ridgway, the number of victims grows once again, now to 49.
There was so much emotion in that courtroom, even the judge choked up. There were families of other victims there, and there were the Romeros, whose pain quickly turned to anger. He walked into the courtroom like he's done many times before. For the Marreros, this is the first time, the moment they've been waiting 29 years for, and it's bittersweet.
How do you plead to the crime that's been charged?
Guilty. Guilty of murdering Becky Marrero, December 3rd, 1982. She is Gary Ridgway's 49th victim. Her 79-year-old mother, Sister Mary and a niece she never got to meet walked up to the podium past Ridgway and spoke for Becky.
He's a waste of society and a waste of space. If I had one thing to ask you today, it would be kill him. He has beat the system just like he beat his victims. I know he will burn in hell because you can't be God.
With a stoic look on his face, Ridgway appeared to listen.
I ask you again, what do you have to do in the state of Washington to get the death penalty?
While nothing can bring them back, I know that Becky's family and the families of his other victims can at least feel a little more at ease knowing why they disappeared. As for Ridgway, I believe he deserved the death penalty, like Ted Bundy. But the death penalty is another debate for another time on another show. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.